The Blue Ridge Mountains whispered secrets that most people would never hear, but Emily Walker knew their language by heart. While her eyes had failed her in childhood, her other senses had sharpened into extraordinary tools that decoded the wilderness in ways others couldn't imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When the autumn storm descended without warning, transforming familiar paths into treacherous puzzles, it wasn't just her life at stake, it was a testament to what connection truly meant in its purest form. For Emily, the rancher's daughter who moved through darkness with uncommon grace, and for Shadow, the silver-grey wolf who owed his life to her compassion years before, this journey would redefine what it meant to see with more than eyes. And for Dr. Olivia Thompson, the wildlife veterinarian whose scientific certainty had calcified into dogma, tracking them through impossible terrain would become more than a rescue mission. This is a story of survival against impossible odds, of finding one's way when all familiar paths disappear, and how three souls, human, animal, and somewhere in between, forged something unbreakable amid the unforgiving wilderness of Silverpine Valley. The October wind shifted direction without warning, carrying away the familiar scents Emily Walker had been following back to Oakwood Ranch. She paused, tilting her head slightly as she focused on the sudden change. At 26, Emily had spent nearly 2 decades navigating the world without sight, developing an internal compass that rarely failed her. But today, something felt wrong. "Shadow?" she called softly, waiting for the reassuring brush of fur. Against her leg, the wolf appeared immediately at her side, his body warm and solid against her thigh. Emily reached down, her fingers finding the thick ruff around his neck, a wolf in his prime, powerful and wild, yet bound to her by something deeper than domestication. The sky, which had been clear when she'd left the ranch that morning, had shifted dramatically. Emily couldn't see the gathering clouds, but she felt the drop in barometric pressure, sensed the sudden chill that swept down from higher elevations, smelled the metallic tang of approaching rain. "We need to get home," she murmured to Shadow, though she was unsure which direction to take. The storm had disoriented her, scrambling the delicate mental map she maintained of Oakwood Ranch's northeastern border. Emily wasn't supposed to be this far from home alone. Her father, Jack Walker, had established clear boundaries after her mother died. But Emily had followed Shadow that morning when the wolf had grown unusually agitated, pacing and whining at the edge of the property. 6 years since she'd found him as an orphaned pup, and still his instincts sometimes called him to the wild places beyond the ranch. Just a short tracking exercise, she had promised herself, touching the compass in her pocket and the emergency satellite phone strapped securely to her belt. Just another opportunity to practice the skills she'd developed since childhood, when retinitis pigmentosa had gradually stolen her vision, leaving her in complete darkness by age 12. The first fat raindrops struck Emily's face like cold. Her fingertips, and the wind surged with sudden violence. Shadow pressed closer, a low rumble in his chest. He sensed danger before she did. It was one of the many ways they kept each other safe. "Which way, boy?" Emily asked, trusting the wolf's instincts when her own sensory map had failed. Shadow moved, nudging her hand with his muzzle, then stepping forward, encouraging her to follow. Emily took a deep breath and made a decision. Trust the wolf who had never led her astray. The rain intensified within minutes, drumming against the earth and washing away the scent trails Emily typically used for orientation. Her boots sank into rapidly muddying ground, and the walking stick she always carried found less purchase with each step. The temperature dropped sharply, and Emily pulled her jacket tighter, grateful she'd at least dressed for the fall mountain weather. Shadow led her steadily uphill, away from what Emily believed was the direction of the ranch. She hesitated, confusion clouding her judgment. "The ranch is the other way," she said, tugging slightly on Shadow's fur to redirect him. The wolf resisted, whining with unusual intensity. Emily paused, torn between her instincts and Shadow's. Lightning cracked overhead, so close that Emily felt the electricity prickle across her skin. Shadow barked sharply, a rare sound from the normally silent wolf, and pulled harder. The thunder that followed was deafening, rolling through the mountains like an avalanche. Then Emily heard it beneath the thunder, a deep, ominous cracking. Sound followed by what could only be described as the mountain groaning. Having grown up in these mountains, she recognized the sound immediately. Mudslide. Terror swept through her as she realized Shadow hadn't been leading her away from home. He'd been leading her away from danger. Even as the realization hit, the ground beneath Emily's feet shuddered. Shadow's teeth closed gently but firmly around her wrist, tugging her forward with newfound urgency. Emily abandoned all resistance and ran beside the wolf, surrendering completely to his guidance. The roar behind them grew, a terrible sound of earth, trees and rock becoming liquid, devouring everything in its path. The ground trembled with increasing violence, threatening to sweep Emily's feet from under her. Shadow veered suddenly left, pulling Emily up a steeper incline. Her lungs burned as she climbed, fingertips scraping against rock as she scrambled for handholds. The mudslide's roar became deafening, and Emily felt debris pelting her back, advanced shrapnel from the approaching destruction. Just as her strength began to fail, Shadow tugged her sharply sideways. Emily's shoulder scraped against what felt like stone, and suddenly the rain was gone. The acoustics changed dramatically. They were in some kind of shelter, a cave. Shadow had found a cave. Breathless, Emily collapsed onto the dry stone floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, the mountain continued to tear itself apart, but the sound was slightly muffled now. They were safe, at least for the moment. As her breathing steadied, Emily took inventory of her situation. The cave was small but dry, its floor smooth beneath her palms. Shadow circled the space, inspecting their shelter before returning to Emily's side, his warm body pressing reassuringly against her. "Good boy," she whispered, burying her fingers in his thick fur. "You saved us." The irony wasn't lost on Emily. 6 years ago, she had found Shadow as a dying pup, his mother killed by a poacher just beyond Oakwood's property line. Against her father's initial judgment, Emily had nursed the wolf back to health, forming a bond that defied conventional understanding of wolf behavior. Now Shadow had returned that life debt, in the most literal sense. Emily reached for the satellite phone at her belt, her last connection to home and safety. Her fingers met empty space where the device should have been, lost in the frantic escape. From the mudslide, the realization settled coldly in her stomach. No one knew exactly where she was, and now she had no way to tell them. Shadow sensed her distress, whining softly and pressing his muzzle against her hand. "It's okay," Emily assured him, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. "Dad will come looking when we don't return." But even as she spoke, Emily knew the search would be complicated by the storm and mudslide. Jack Walker was an experienced outdoorsman, but the Blue Ridge Mountains encompassed vast wilderness. Without a signal from her phone to narrow the search area, finding them would be like locating a specific pine needle in a forest. Outside, the rain intensified, and the temperature continued to drop. October in the Blue Ridge could be unpredictable, warm, days giving way to near-freezing nights, especially at higher elevations. Emily took inventory of her supplies, a small water bottle, a few energy bars, a pocket knife, waterproof matches, and a space blanket in the small pack she always carried. Enough to survive, but for how long? "We'll rest here until the storm passes," she told Shadow, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. As daylight faded, the cave grew colder. Emily unfolded the space blanket, its crinkly material, reflecting what little body heat she generated. Shadow curled around her, a living furnace against the mountain chill. Though worry gnawed at her, Emily found comfort in the wolf's steady presence. "Dad's going to be furious," she murmured into Shadow's fur. "You know how he gets when I go beyond the boundaries." Shadow's only response was to nestle closer, his breath warm against her neck. Jack Walker's protectiveness had intensified after Emily's mother died from cancer 5 years earlier. The rules and boundaries had multiplied, reasonable precautions, he called them, necessary safeguards for a blind woman living on a remote ranch. Emily understood his fear, but chafed against the limitations. She was more capable than he believed, more attuned to the wilderness than most sighted people. Dr. Olivia Thompson had understood that. During her 6-month research project on wolf reintegration in the Blue Ridge ecosystem, the wildlife veterinarian had witnessed firsthand Emily's extraordinary abilities. Olivia had even documented Shadow's unusual behavior, a wild wolf choosing to stay with humans, forming a partnership that defied scientific explanation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You two are rewriting what we know about interspecies bonds," Olivia had said, before departing for her university position in Colorado. She'd promised to return for follow-up research, but that had been nearly a year ago. Emily sometimes wondered if the scientists thought about them, if Shadow featured in her academic papers. As night deepened, Emily drifted into uneasy sleep, Shadow's heart beat a steady rhythm against her side. Her dreams were fragmented, memories of walking these mountains with her mother as a child, when her vision was merely poor instead of non-existent. Flashes of the day she'd found Shadow, tiny and trembling, beside his dead mother. Olivia's voice explaining wolf communication patterns, while Emily's fingers traced a topographical map of Silverpine Valley. Emily woke to Shadow's sudden alertness. The wolf had lifted his head, ears forward, body tense. Outside, the rain had stopped, but something had disturbed him. Emily strained her ears, filtering through the ambient sounds of the mountain night, until she caught it, a distant howl, lonely and questioning. Shadow stood, moving to the cave entrance, his posture changing in a way Emily could sense, even without seeing. This was wild Shadow emerging, the wolf rather than the companion. "Is it your family?" Emily asked softly. Sometimes Shadow would answer distant howls, though he never left to join the small wild pack that roamed the northern reaches of Silverpine. As if in answer, Shadow let out a long, haunting howl that echoed through the cave and beyond. Emily listened as his call was answered, not one voice now, but several. A conversation she couldn't translate, but instinctively understood was important. Shadow returned to Emily's side, pressing against her with new urgency. "What is it, boy? What are you telling me?" The wolf circled, then gently gripped her sleeve, tugging her toward the cave entrance. Emily hesitated. Venturing out at night, especially after a mudslide, seemed foolhardy. But Shadow's insistence was uncharacteristic enough to give her pause. "Are you sure?" she asked, knowing the wolf couldn't answer but trusting his instincts nonetheless. Shadow's response was to tug again, more firmly this time. Emily gathered her few belongings, folding the space blanket and returning it to her pack. She extended her walking stick, testing the ground before her as she followed Shadow to the cave entrance. The night air was crisp and cleared of the storm's heaviness. Emily breathed deeply, detecting the rich scent of wet earth, pine, and the distinctive mineral tang of freshly exposed rock. The mudslide had changed the landscape, remapping a terrain she had once known by heart. "Lead on," she told Shadow, placing her hand lightly on his back. I trust you." Shadow moved carefully, choosing a path that avoided the worst of the mudslide's aftermath. Emily followed, her walking stick probing the changed earth, her feet finding purchase where Shadow indicated. It was slow progress through the dark wilderness, but Emily moved with growing confidence as her trust in Shadow's guidance deepened. They had been traveling for perhaps an hour when Shadow froze. Emily halted beside him, sensing his sudden tension. A new scent reached her. Smoke. Not the destructive rage of a forest fire, but the controlled burn of a campfire. People. Shadow growled softly, his body coiling with newfound wariness. Emily stroked his fur, calming him while she considered their options. Strangers in these. Remote mountains could be hikers, hunters, or forest rangers. They might offer help, or they might pose a danger to a woman and a wolf alone in the wilderness. "Let's approach carefully," Emily whispered to Shadow. "Stay close." They moved toward the scent of smoke with increased caution. As they drew nearer, Emily began to distinguish voices. Two people engaged in conversation, their tones suggesting disagreement. Shadow's hackles raised slightly under Emily's fingertips. Suddenly, one voice became clear enough to recognize, and Emily's heart leaped with unexpected emotion. "Irresponsible to track in these conditions. We should wait until morning, when we can get a proper search team organized." "There won't be anyone to find by morning if that mudslide caught them," a male voice responded. Her father's voice, tight with barely controlled fear. "Jack, be reasonable. Your daughter knows these mountains. My blind daughter, Olivia. My blind daughter, who has no business being out in this wilderness alone." "She's not alone," the woman, Dr. Olivia Thompson, countered. "She has Shadow. That wolf is more reliable than most trained search and rescue dogs I've worked with." Emily stepped forward, Shadow close at her side. "She also has excellent hearing," she called out, unable to keep a hint of amusement from her voice despite the circumstances. "Emily!" Her father's voice broke with relief. Footsteps rushed toward her, and then familiar arms enveloped her, smelling of leather, pine, and home. "Thank God. When that mudslide hit, and you weren't home." "I'm okay." "Dad," Emily assured him, returning his embrace before gently extracting herself. "Shadow found shelter. He kept me safe." "Of course he did," said another voice, Olivia's now much closer. "That's what I've been trying to tell your father for the last 3 hours." Emily turned toward the voice, surprised by the scientist's unexpected presence. "Dr. Thompson, what are you doing here?" "I arrived this afternoon for follow-up research," Olivia explained. "Perfect timing to join the search party when you didn't return." "Hardly a party," Jack muttered. "The roads are washed out. Can't get any help from town until morning." "So you two came looking alone?" Emily asked, touched by their concern, but aware of the risks they'd taken. "Your father wouldn't wait," Olivia said, her voice softening, "and I couldn't let him go alone." Shadow nudged past Emily, approaching Olivia with what Emily knew would be cautious recognition. The wolf had spent considerable time with the researcher during her previous visit. "Hello to you too, remarkable creature," Olivia murmured. Emily heard the smile in her voice, the genuine affection beneath the scientific interest. "We should get back to camp," Jack said, his hand finding Emily's shoulder. "There's food and a tent. You must be exhausted." As they walked toward the campsite, Jack maintained contact with Emily, his grip perhaps tighter than necessary. Emily allowed it, understanding his fear. Shadow padded alongside them, occasionally brushing against Emily's leg in what she recognized as reassurance. "How did you find us?" Emily asked as they settled around the campfire. The warmth reached toward her like welcoming hands, and the smell of coffee brewing made her realize how thirsty she was. "Your father knew the general area. You like to explore," Olivia explained, pressing a tin cup of hot coffee into Emily's hands. "But it was actually Shadow's pack that led us in the right direction." "His pack?" Emily cradled the warm cup, confusion evident in her voice. 3 wolves approached our camp about an hour ago, Olivia continued, excitement bleeding into her professional tone. They kept a safe distance, but their behavior was clearly communicative. They'd howl, then move away, then return when we didn't follow. I thought they were just curious about the campfire, Jack admitted. Olivia was the one who suggested they might be trying to lead us somewhere. And Shadow answered their howls, Emily realized, remembering the wolf's behavior in the cave. He called them to find us. It's extraordinary behavior, Olivia said. Wolf packs don't typically interact with humans this way. Shadow has essentially created a bridge between species. Emily reached down to find Shadow's fur. Gratitude overwhelming her. The wolf leaned into her touch, his presence steady and reassuring as always. I told you he was special, she said softly. You both are, Olivia replied. The connection you've developed defies conventional understanding of human-wildlife relationships. It's why I came back. My preliminary research barely scratched the surface of what's happening between you two. Jack cleared his throat. As fascinating as all this is, it doesn't change the fact that Emily took an unnecessary risk today. If Shadow hadn't found that cave, but he did, Emily interrupted gently. Dad, I know you worry, but Shadow and I look out for each other. Today proved that. Today proved how dangerous these mountains can be, Jack countered, his voice tight with residual fear. The boundaries we set aren't arbitrary, Emily. They're for your protection. Emily bristled slightly, familiar frustration rising. I'm not a child anymore. Being blind doesn't make me helpless. No one is suggesting you're helpless, Olivia interjected diplomatically. But even the most experienced outdoors people can find themselves in danger when natural disasters strike. That mudslide would have been impossible to predict. Exactly my point, Jack said. The unpredictability is why. It's also why Shadow is so valuable, Olivia continued smoothly. He sensed the danger before it was apparent. That kind of instinct, combined with Emily's unique sensory adaptations, creates a remarkably effective team. Silence fell around the campfire, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the distant call of a night bird. Emily sipped her coffee, absorbing the tension between her father's protective fear and her own need for independence. Olivia's presence added another dimension, scientific interest layered with something less definable. I didn't mean to worry you, Emily finally said to her father, but I need you to understand that with Shadow, I'm safer than you think. Today wasn't a failure of judgment. It was proof that our system works. Jack sighed heavily. You sound just like your mother, he said, his voice softening with memory. She always said I underestimated you. She was right, Emily replied gently. Perhaps, Jack conceded, but asking me not to worry is like asking the mountains not to be tall. It's just part of who I am. Emily reached across the space between them, finding her father's rough hand and squeezing it. I wouldn't want you to stop caring, Dad. Just maybe trust a little more, in me and in Shadow. The bond you share with Shadow is truly remarkable. Olivia observed quietly. In all my years studying wolf behavior, I've never documented anything quite like it. It's not just remarkable, Emily said, her hand finding Shadow's fur once more. It's reciprocal. I didn't save Shadow as a pup, so he could become my guide. We found each other when we both needed someone. Everything since has been organic. The conversation drifted then, turning to practical matters of returning to the ranch in the morning, assessing storm damage, and contacting the authorities about the mudslide. Eventually, exhaustion overtook Emily, and she retired to the small tent Jack had erected, Shadow following faithfully. As she settled into her sleeping bag, the wolf's warm weight pressed against her side, Emily reflected on the day's events. The terror of the mudslide had revealed truths she had always known but struggled to articulate, that her bond with Shadow transcended conventional understanding, that her father's fear came from love rather than doubt, and that her own capabilities were more substantial than even she sometimes acknowledged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, navigating changed terrain, confronting her father's lingering fears, exploring whatever had brought Dr. Thompson back to their lives. But for now, with Shadow's steady heartbeat against her ribs and the knowledge that she was found, Emily allowed herself to drift towards sleep, certain of one thing: in a world of darkness, she had never truly been lost. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morning brought birdsong and the distinctive scent of pine, warmed by early sunlight. Emily woke slowly, her body stiff from the previous day's exertion, but her mind clearer than it had been in months. Shadow was already awake, his weight no longer against her, but his presence still palpable within the small tent. "Morning, boy," she murmured, sitting up and orienting herself to the unfamiliar space. The events of the previous day filtered. Back the mudslide, the cave, the rescue. She reached for her pack, fingers finding her collapsible walking stick and the few supplies she'd managed to save. Outside the tent, voices murmured. Her father and Olivia, their conversation too low to distinguish words, but the tone suggesting serious discussion. Emily dressed quickly, pulling on her still damp boots with a grimace before unzipping the tent and emerging into the crisp mountain morning. "There she is," Jack said, his voice warmer than it had been the previous night. "How'd you sleep, Ember?" The childhood nickname, rarely used since her mother's death, brought a smile to Emily's lips. "Like someone who outran a mudslide," she replied, moving toward the sound of her father's voice. Shadow appeared immediately at her side, guiding her toward the renewed campfire. "Coffee," Olivia offered, pressing a warm mug into Emily's hands. Once she was seated on what felt like a fallen log. "Thank you." Emily inhaled the rich aroma gratefully. "Have you two been up long?" "Your father's been up since dawn," Olivia said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "He hiked back toward the mudslide to assess the damage and check our route home." "The main trail's completely gone," Jack confirmed. "We'll need to take the high ridge path. It's longer, but safer." Emily nodded, sipping her coffee, as she considered the journey ahead. The high ridge would mean steeper climbs, but solid ground. A fair trade, given the circumstances. "Dr. Thompson," Emily began. "Olivia, please," the scientist interrupted, gently. "After yesterday, I think we're beyond formalities." "Olivia," Emily amended, "you still haven't explained why you're back in Blue Ridge." There was a slight pause before Olivia answered, her tone shifting to something more professional. "My initial research on Shadow generated significant interest in the scientific community. The university approved funding for a more comprehensive study of his behavior and your partnership. I was planning to discuss it with you and your father yesterday, but then I went missing," Emily finished. "I'm sorry to have disrupted your plans." "On the contrary," Olivia replied, unexpected warmth coloring her voice. "Yesterday provided more valuable data than a month of controlled observation might have. Shadow not only protected you during a natural disaster, but successfully communicated with a wild pack to facilitate your rescue. It's unprecedented." Emily felt Shadow press against her leg, as if aware he was the subject of discussion. She ran her fingers through his thick fur, considering the implications of Olivia's continued research. "How long would this study last?" Jack asked, the protective edge returning to his voice. 6 months, potentially longer if the results warrant it," Olivia answered. "I'd need to observe Shadow in various contexts, on the ranch, in wilderness settings, interacting with other wolves." "And Emily?" Jack pressed. What would her involvement be? Emily bristled slightly at being discussed in the third person. I think that's for me to decide, Dad. Of course it is, Olivia said quickly. Your participation would be entirely on your terms. I'm interested in how your sensory adaptations complement Shadow's abilities, how you work together to navigate environments that would challenge either of you alone. The proposition intrigued Emily. Most research involving blindness focused on limitations or compensatory strategies. Olivia seemed genuinely interested in how Emily's unique perceptual world enhanced rather than hindered her partnership with Shadow. I'd need to understand exactly what would be involved, Emily said cautiously. Shadow isn't a research subject to be prodded and analyzed. He's family. I understand completely, Olivia assured her. My approach has always been observational rather than interventional. I want to document what already exists naturally between you two, not disrupt it. Jack made a sound that wasn't quite agreement but wasn't outright objection either. We can discuss details back at the ranch, he said finally. For now, we need to break camp and start moving. That mudslide destabilized a lot of ground. There could be secondary slides if the soil gets saturated again. The conversation shifted to practical matters. Packing gear, planning their route, distributing supplies. Within an hour, they were ready to depart, the campsite erased of all evidence of their presence. The journey back would be challenging. Emily knew the high ridge trail from previous explorations, but it would be different now. The landmarks altered by the storm, the familiar scents and sounds transformed. She extended her walking stick and found Shadow's reassuring presence. At her side, "Ready?" she asked him quietly. Shadow pressed against her leg, his message clear, always. "We'll take it slow," Jack said, his hand briefly touching Emily's shoulder. "Olivia will lead. I'll bring up the rear. Shadow knows what to do." Emily nodded, appreciating her father's acknowledgement of Shadow's role. It was a small concession but significant. Recognition that the wolf was more than just a companion animal. They set off single file, Olivia in front setting a careful pace, Emily and Shadow following, Jack watching protectively from behind. The trail climbed steadily, transitioning from damp forest floor to rockier terrain as they gained elevation. Emily moved with practiced confidence, her walking stick testing the ground ahead while Shadow guided her around obstacles too large to navigate easily. Her other senses compensated for her lack of vision, the subtle changes in air currents indicating open spaces versus dense forest, the varying echoes of their footsteps revealing the width of the trail, the shifting scents marking transitions between micro-ecosystems. "Amazing," Olivia murmured, after watching Emily navigate a particularly tricky section of trail. "You read the landscape in ways I can barely comprehend." "It's not that different from how you observe," Emily replied. "Just different data points." They continued climbing, the exertion warming their muscles against the morning chill. Shadow moved with fluid grace beside Emily, occasionally ranging ahead to scout the path before returning to her side. The wolf's behavior seemed to fascinate Olivia, who periodically made quiet notes into a small recorder she carried. "The way he checks difficult terrain before you reach it shows remarkable foresight," Olivia observed during a brief rest. "And he consistently identifies the optimal path for your specific needs. It goes beyond basic assistance animal training." "That's because it isn't training," Emily explained, catching her breath as they perched on a rocky outcropping. "It's partnership. Shadow wasn't taught to guide me, he chose to." "The distinction is significant," Olivia agreed. "Most service animals are conditioned through repetitive training to perform specific tasks. Shadow appears to problem-solve, independently adapting to changing conditions." Jack, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "He's been doing it since he was barely more than a pup. First time Emily took him outside after nursing him back to health, he started staying to her left side, slowing down at steps or holes. Emily smiled at the memory. Dad thought I'd secretly trained him somehow. Wouldn't have put it past you, Jack said, affection warming his gruff tone. You were always determined to prove you could manage on your own. The conversation lapsed as they continued their journey, the terrain growing increasingly challenging as they approached the ridge's highest point. Emily could feel the air thinning slightly, the temperature dropping as they climbed. Shadow stayed closer now, his body occasionally pressing against her leg to subtly adjust her course. By midday, they had reached the ridge's summit. Olivia described the view: the sprawling Silverpine Valley below, the distant rooftops of Pinecrest Town, and to the north, the stark brown scar where the mudslide had torn through the mountain's flank. It's massive, Olivia said quietly. If you'd been in its path. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Emily reached down to touch Shadow's head, silent gratitude flowing between woman and wolf. They ate a simple lunch of trail bars and dried fruit, conserving their limited supplies. The descent would be faster than the climb, but required equal caution. Loose rocks and steep switchbacks made for treacherous footing, especially for someone navigating by touch and sound rather than sight. As they prepared to continue, Emily sensed Shadow's sudden alertness. The wolf's posture changed beneath her hand, his muscles tensing. "What is it, boy?" she asked quietly. Shadow growled low in his throat, not threatening, but communicative. "A warning. Something's wrong," Emily said, halting the group's preparation. "Shadow senses something." Jack and Olivia fell silent, listening. Emily filtered through the ambient sounds of the mountain. Wind through pine needles, distant bird calls, the soft crunch of their own movements on rocky soil. Then she caught it. A faint rumble, more felt than heard. "Another slide," she said, urgently, "coming from the north face." "I don't hear anything," Jack began, but Olivia cut him off. "Wait, she's right. There's vibration through the ground, subtle but increasing." Shadow's growl deepened, and he nudged Emily firmly, urging her back toward the summit they'd just left. "We need to move," Emily said, already turning to follow Shadow's guidance. "Now." This time there was no argument. Jack and Olivia fell in behind Emily and Shadow as they quickly retraced their steps upward. The rumbling grew more pronounced, and soon even Jack acknowledged the danger. "It's cascading through the lower valleys," he said, voice tight with urgency. The first slide must have destabilized the entire watershed. They climbed rapidly, muscles protesting the renewed exertion. Shadow led Emily with determined purpose, choosing a path that angled away from the approaching danger rather than directly opposing it. Emily trusted his instincts implicitly, following without hesitation even when the route seemed counterintuitive. The rumbling grew to a roar beneath them, the entire mountainside trembling with secondary slides. They reached a stone outcropping that jutted from the ridge like a ship's prow, offering stable ground amidst the chaos. Shadow guided Emily to the highest point, their small group huddling together as the world seemed to dissolve around them. "Look!" Olivia shouted over the noise, pointing downslope. "The slide is splitting around this formation. Shadow brought us to the one safe place on the entire ridge." Emily couldn't see the destruction, but she could feel the mountain's convulsions, hear the cracking of trees and the grinding of rock against rock as thousands of tons of earth relocated themselves below. Shadow pressed against her, his body solid and warm amidst the terrifying symphony of destruction. For long minutes they could only wait as nature reshaped the landscape. When the noise finally began to subside, replaced by the eerie silence that follows catastrophe, Jack was the first to speak. "Our planned route is gone," he said grimly, "along with most of the North Slope trails." "How far are we from the ranch?" Emily asked, trying to recalibrate her mental map of the transformed terrain. As the crow flies, maybe 5 miles, Jack answered, but with the trails gone. We'll need to forge a new path, Olivia finished, through completely unfamiliar territory. The implications settled heavily among them. Creating a new route through wilderness was challenging under the best circumstances. Doing so after a natural disaster with limited supplies and a member who couldn't see approached impossible. Emily felt the weight of their unspoken concern. She might become a liability in this situation, slowing their progress when speed was essential. Before either her father or Olivia could suggest leaving her behind while they scouted, Emily made a decision. "Shadow can find the way," she said with quiet confidence. "He navigated us to safety twice now. He can lead us home." "Emily," Jack began, his tone gentle but doubtful. "Shadow is remarkable, but this is different. The entire landscape has changed." "That doesn't matter to him," Emily insisted. "Wolves don't navigate by visual landmarks the way humans do. They use scent, sound, air currents, all the same tools I use. Shadow knows where home is, and he knows how to get me there safely." There was a moment of silence as Jack and Olivia considered her words. Emily waited, her hand resting on Shadow's back, feeling the steady strength beneath his fur. "She's right," Olivia said finally. "Wolf navigation is primarily olfactory. Visual changes to the landscape would be less disruptive to Shadow than to us." Jack sighed heavily, the sound carrying years of worry and the weight of current danger. "What do you think, boy?" he asked, addressing Shadow directly. "Can you get us home?" Shadow, as if understanding the question, moved forward slightly, his posture alert and purposeful. Emily smiled, recognizing his answer before he gave it, a short, sharp bark that echoed against the stone outcropping. "That's settled, then," Emily said, extending her walking stick. "Shadow leads." With the decision made, they took inventory of their remaining supplies and prepared to depart their rocky sanctuary. The afternoon was advancing, and none of them relished the thought of being caught in the wilderness after nightfall. They would need to move quickly but cautiously through terrain that had been fundamentally altered by the with Shadow taking the lead. They descended carefully from the stone outcropping that had sheltered them from the secondary mudslides. Emily moved with deliberate confidence, her walking stick testing each step while her free hand maintained light contact with Shadow's back. The wolf picked his way through debris with uncanny precision, consistently finding stable footing even where the ground had been churned into treacherous terrain. "It's almost like he's choosing a human path rather than a wolf one," Olivia observed, following closely behind Emily. "He's factoring in your needs rather than simply taking the most efficient route for himself." Emily nodded. "He's always done that. It's as if he understands my limitations but never sees them as obstacles, just parameters to work within." Jack brought up the rear, his experienced eyes constantly scanning for dangers that Shadow might have missed. Emily could sense her father's vigilance in the rhythm of his footsteps, the occasional pause as he assessed their surroundings. His protective instinct remained on high alert, despite his tentative acceptance of Shadow's guidance. The forest had been transformed by the dual slides. Trees lay uprooted or snapped at their trunks, creating a maze of fallen timber they needed to navigate around. The familiar smells of pine and forest floor were now interlaced with the scents of freshly exposed earth, broken vegetation, and disturbed rock. For Emily, this olfactory chaos was disorienting. Many of her usual navigational markers had been obliterated. "I can't believe Shadow is finding a path through this," Jack muttered as they squeezed between two massive fallen pines. "I can barely see a way forward, and I've been traversing these mountains for 30 years. "That's the advantage of not relying primarily on vision," Olivia replied. "When visual landmarks disappear, Those who navigate by other senses may actually have an advantage. Shadow paused at the edge of what Olivia described as a newly formed gully carved by the rushing waters that had preceded the mudslide. The wolf tested the edge, then backed away, clearly indicating the path was unsafe. "We need to find a crossing point," Jack said, moving forward to stand beside Emily and Shadow. "This ravine could run for miles." Shadow seemed to understand the dilemma. He led them parallel to the gully, moving downstream where the gap might narrow. Emily focused on the changing sounds around them, the way ambient noise reflected differently as the ravine's shape altered, the subtle variations in the water flow below that might indicate a narrowing of the channel. The current slowing. "Here," she said, after they'd traveled about a quarter-mile along the gully's edge. "The ravine might be widening, creating a pool." "She's right," Jack confirmed after peering down into the crevasse. "There's a debris dam forming a small pond. If we could get down there, crossing would be easier." Shadow had already begun seeking a descent route, carefully testing the steep bank with his paws before committing to a path. Emily followed his guidance, using her walking stick to brace against the incline as they made their way down to the water's edge. Jack and Olivia followed, occasionally steadying Emily when the grade became particularly steep. At the bottom, they faced the challenge of crossing the newly formed pond. What had been a raging torrent during the mudslide was now a relatively calm pool about 30 feet across, choked with fallen trees and debris. "We could try to make a bridge using some of these fallen limbs," Jack suggested, already assessing the available materials. But Shadow had other ideas. He led Emily to where a massive pine had fallen almost the entire way across the water, creating a natural bridge that stopped just short of the far bank. "Perfect," Olivia breathed. "It's like he's problem-solving in real time." Jack tested the fallen trunk, finding it solid and relatively stable. "This will work, but crossing will be tricky. The bark is still wet and slippery." Emily considered the challenge, then knelt to remove her boots and socks. "I'll go barefoot," she explained. "I can feel the surface better that way." Jack started to protest, but stopped himself, recognizing the wisdom in her approach. Emily had always navigated most confidently with direct tactile feedback from the terrain. "I'll go first," Olivia offered. "Test the stability." "No," Emily said firmly. "Shadow and I will go first. He knows how to guide me across. If we make it safely, you two can follow." Before either Jack or Olivia could object, Emily was on, her feet, toes gripping the rough bark of the fallen pine. Shadow positioned himself slightly ahead and to her left, his customary guiding position when terrain became challenging. Emily extended her walking stick to her right, using it for additional balance as she took her first careful steps onto the makeshift bridge. The crossing was precarious. The log shifted slightly under their combined weight, and water occasionally splashed up as debris in the pond adjusted to the disturbance. Emily moved with cat-like precision, each footfall deliberate and tested before she committed her weight. Shadow paced himself perfectly to her rhythm, pausing when she paused, advancing when she advanced. "They move like a single organism," Olivia whispered to Jack, her voice carrying clearly to Emily's sensitive ears. "It's beyond anything I've documented in human-animal interactions." Near the end of the log, they encountered the gap where the tree hadn't quite reached the opposite bank, a jump of about 3 feet over water of unknown depth. Shadow leapt across effortlessly, then turned back, whining softly to communicate the obstacle to Emily. Emily paused, calculating the distance from the sound of Shadow's landing and the change in his voice's acoustics. Without hesitation, she coiled and sprung across the gap, landing firmly on the muddy bank beside the wolf. "We're across," she called back, unable to suppress a smile of satisfaction. "The log is stable, but there's a gap at the end. You'll need to jump the last few feet." Jack and Olivia followed, crossing with more visible caution than Emily had shown. When they reached the far side, Jack pulled Emily into a brief, fierce hug. "That was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't decide which." "Neither," Emily replied, pulling away to put her socks and boots back on. "It was just necessary." Their path forward from the ravine led through forest that had been less impacted by the slides, though evidence of the storm's fury remained in scattered deadfall and areas of standing water. Shadow maintained his lead position, occasionally ranging ahead to scout before returning to guide Emily through particularly challenging sections. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the temperature began to drop and their pace slowed with fatigue. They had been moving for hours through difficult terrain, and the physical toll was becoming evident in their labored breathing and increasingly cautious steps. "We need to consider stopping for the night," Jack finally said, breaking a long silence. Pushing through after dark would be dangerous, even with Shadow's guidance. Emily knew he was right, though the thought of spending another night away from the ranch and delaying their return to safety was disheartening. Her muscles ached, and her feet had developed painful blisters from the wet boots. Even Shadow showed signs of tiring, his movements less fluid than earlier in the day. "There's a rock formation ahead," Olivia observed. "Might offer some shelter if we can reach it before sunset." With renewed purpose, they pressed forward toward the promised shelter. The formation turned out to be a cluster of large boulders, some the size of small cars, piled together in what Olivia described as a natural stone igloo. A space between several of the largest rocks created a protected hollow, just large enough for the three humans to shelter comfortably. "Shadow found this place deliberately," Olivia remarked as they set up their sparse camp. "These formations aren't common in this part of the Blue Ridge. He's brought us to another perfect shelter." Emily sensed her father's growing acceptance of Shadow's capabilities as he worked silently to prepare their campsite. Jack had always respected the wolf, but maintained a certain skepticism about the depth of his intelligence and the nature of his bond with Emily. The events of the past 2 days were challenging those limitations. As darkness fell, they huddled together in the stone shelter, sharing the last of their food, a few trail bars and beef jerky Jack had packed for the search. Shadow lay at the entrance, his body positioned to both guard and provide additional warmth against the mountain night. "Will we reach the ranch tomorrow?" Emily asked, directing her question to both Jack and Shadow. "Hard to say," her father replied. "Without trails to follow, it's difficult to gauge distance accurately. But if we maintain today's pace and avoid any more natural disasters, we should reach Oakwood by mid-afternoon." Shadow shifted at the mention of home, a soft whine escaping him that Emily interpreted as confirmation. She reached out to stroke his thick fur, finding comfort in his solid presence. "I've been thinking about your research proposal," Emily said to Olivia after a comfortable silence had settled around them. "About studying Shadow and our partnership." Olivia stirred beside her. "And?" "I'd like to participate, but with conditions. Shadow remains free to come and go as he chooses. No collars, no trackers, nothing that makes him feel constrained or observed." "Of course," Olivia agreed readily. "My interest is in your natural interactions. Artificial constraints would contaminate the data. And I want to be actively involved in the research design," Emily continued, "not just as a subject, but as a contributor. I understand Shadow in ways that even the most qualified scientist couldn't." There was a smile in Olivia's voice when she replied, "I was hoping you'd say that. Your insights would be invaluable. This could be a truly collaborative study crossing the boundaries between objective observation and lived experience." Jack cleared his throat, If you two are planning to turn my ranch into a research station, I should probably have some input too." Emily heard the acceptance beneath his gruff tone and smiled. "Absolutely, Dad. Your observations of Shadow over the years are just as important as mine." As they discussed preliminary ideas for the study, Emily felt a subtle shift in the group's dynamic. The crisis that had thrown them together was evolving into something potentially valuable, a collaboration that might help others understand the profound connections possible between species. The conversation eventually dwindled as exhaustion claimed them one by one. Jack was the first to fall silent, his breathing deepening into sleep. Olivia followed soon after, murmuring a quiet goodnight, before shifting into a more comfortable position against the stone wall. Emily remained awake longer, listening to the night sounds of the mountain and feeling Shadow's reassuring presence at the entrance to their shelter. The wolf was still alert, standing watch over his unusual pack with unwavering dedication. "We're almost home," Emily whispered to him, her voice barely audible. "You're doing something incredible, you know that?" Shadow moved closer in response, laying his head across her lap with unusual tenderness. Emily stroked his ears, finding the spot behind his right ear that had been his favorite since puppyhood. The wolf sighed contentedly, some of the tension leaving his powerful frame. Despite her exhaustion, Emily found herself reflecting on the journey so far. The terror of the mudslide seemed distant now, replaced by a profound appreciation for what the crisis had revealed. Not just Shadow's extraordinary capabilities, but her father's fierce love despite his overprotectiveness, and the unexpected connection forming with Olivia, whose scientific curiosity was tempered by genuine respect. The world believed blindness was about absence, the lack of sight creating insurmountable obstacles. But Emily had long known the truth. Her experience was about presence, heightened awareness of sounds, scents, textures, and energies that most people filtered out. Shadow understood this instinctively, navigating the world in much the same way, prioritizing sensory information that humans typically overlooked. As sleep finally began to claim her, Emily found herself smiling at the irony. A natural disaster had stranded them miles from home in transformed terrain, yet she had never felt more capable. With Shadow at her side, the wilderness wasn't a place of disability, but of different ability, a realm where her adaptations were advantages rather than limitations. The wolf shifted, settling more comfortably against her as her consciousness began to drift. Their hearts beat in syncopated rhythm, the blind woman and the wolf who saw for her in ways that went beyond vision. Together, they had navigated chaos and found order within it. Tomorrow they would complete their journey home, bringing with them not just their physical selves, but a deeper understanding of what connection truly meant. Emily's last coherent thought before sleep claimed her was a reflection on what her mother had often told her: true sight comes from the heart, not the eyes. Shadow had proven the wisdom of those words more powerfully than anyone could have imagined. Dawn broke with the gentle percussion of dripping dew and distant birdsong. Emily woke to the familiar weight of Shadow pressed against her side, his body heat having kept the mountain chill at bay through the night. She remained still for a moment, taking inventory of her surroundings through sound and scent. The soft breathing of her father and Olivia, still asleep nearby, the fresh pine-laden air flowing into their rock shelter, the absence of yesterday's threatening rumbles. The mountain seemed to have settled, at least temporarily. Shadow stirred, sensing her wakefulness. He stretched, his body vibrating with a silent yawn, before he padded to the shelter's entrance. Emily followed, navigating the short distance with practiced ease, her hands lightly tracing the cool stone walls. Outside, the air carried more information. They were facing east, the warming sunlight caressing her face as a gentle breeze carried the scents of wet earth, conifer, and something else that made Shadow's ears prick forward. Wildlife nearby. "What is it, boy?" Emily whispered, placing her hand on the wolf's back. Shadow remained alert, but not tense, simply observing whatever had caught his attention. A moment later, Emily heard it too. The light footfalls of deer, moving through the forest below their position. At least 3 sets of hooves, delicately picking their way through the debris left by the mudslide. "Game trails often survive natural disasters," came Olivia's voice from behind them, quiet but clear in the morning stillness. "Animals find new paths faster than humans do. They're not tied to the memory of what was there before." Emily nodded, understanding the observation on multiple levels. That's why Shadow's such a good guide. He responds to what is, not what should be. Olivia moved to stand beside them, her presence accompanied by the subtle scent of coffee. She pressed a tin cup into Emily's hands. "Last of our supplies. Your father insisted you have it." The gesture was so typical of Jack Walker that Emily couldn't help smiling. "Where is he?" "Scouting our route ahead," Olivia replied. "He's trying to reconcile himself to Shadow's leadership by finding ways to contribute." Emily sipped the lukewarm coffee gratefully, appreciating both the caffeine and Olivia's insightful understanding of her father's psychology. Jack had never been comfortable feeling superfluous, especially when it came to his daughter's well-being. Shadow's evident competence as Emily's guide challenged Jack's self-appointed role as her protector. "He doesn't need to compete with Shadow," Emily said softly. "I think he's beginning to realize that," Olivia responded. "Yesterday changed something in him. I watched him observing you two crossing that log bridge. The fear in his eyes gave way to something like awe." Before Emily could respond, Shadow tensed beneath her hand, his attention shifting sharply to the west. A moment later, Emily heard her father's footsteps returning, his pace quick but not panicked. "Good, you're up," Jack said as he approached. "We should get moving. There's more weather coming in from the west. I can see clouds building over the next ridge." Emily immediately began gathering her few belongings, collapsing her walking stick and securing it to her belt before kneeling to check her bootlaces. Years of adapting to her blindness had made her meticulous about preparation. Loose laces or unsecured equipment could become dangerous hazards when navigating by touch and sound. "Did you see any landmarks you recognize?" Olivia asked Jack, as they prepared to depart. "Nothing definitive," he admitted. "The slides have changed everything, but there's a creek about half a mile ahead that might be Cedar Creek. If it is, we're closer to home than I thought." Shadow had already positioned himself at Emily's side, his body aligned with hers in their familiar walking formation. Emily felt a surge of gratitude for his constancy. While the humans grappled with disorientation and uncertainty, Shadow remained, focused on their immediate needs, finding a path home. As they set out from the stone shelter, Emily noticed a subtle change in their group dynamic. Jack no longer insisted on maintaining contact with her, instead allowing her to follow Shadow with only occasional verbal guidance when he spotted potential hazards. Olivia had shifted from observer to active participant, describing interesting ecological changes caused by the mudslides and pointing out wildlife returning to the disturbed areas. "Look at that," Olivia said as they approached the creek Jack had mentioned. "There's a beaver already beginning reconstruction work on a dam that must have been destroyed by the flood." "Where?" Emily asked, tilting her head to listen for the sounds of the industrious animal. "About 30 yards downstream," Olivia replied, "just visible through that gap in the pines. He's dragging an astonishingly large branch across the current." Emily smiled at the image, life reasserting itself already. "Nature abhors a vacuum," Olivia agreed. "Ecological systems begin rebalancing almost immediately after disruption. It's one of the most beautiful aspects of wilderness resilience. Jack had moved ahead to inspect the creek crossing, and his voice floated back to them, tinged with relief. It's definitely Cedar Creek. The rock formation on the far bank is unmistakable, 3 boulders stacked like a cairn. We're only about 4 miles from the ranch's northeast boundary. Shadow's ears perked forward at the mention of home, and Emily felt his energy change subtly. A new focus in his movements, a slight increase in his pace. He knew exactly where they were. The creek crossing proved easier than the previous day's ravine challenge. The water was shallow enough to wade across, though the current remained swift. Shadow guided Emily to the safest path, where the stream bed was most stable and the water barely reached her knees. Jack and Olivia followed, forming a human chain as an additional precaution. Once across, they paused to wring out their soaked, bent legs and empty water from their boots. The morning was warming steadily, but wet clothing could still lead to dangerous chills in the mountain environment. The ranch's northeast boundary is marked by an old line shack at the edge of a meadow, Jack explained as they prepared to continue. If we can reach that, we're practically home. Emily nodded, remembering the small wooden structure from her childhood explorations. Before her vision had deteriorated completely, the line shack had been one of her favorite destinations. Far, enough from the main ranch to feel like an adventure, but close enough to reach in an afternoon's hike. Shadow knows that place, she said confidently. We've been there many times. As if in confirmation, the wolf moved forward with renewed purpose, choosing a path that angled more directly southwest. Emily followed, her walking stick finding purchase on increasingly familiar terrain. The forest here showed less damage from the mudslides, though fallen branches and areas of standing water still required careful navigation. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when Shadow suddenly halted, a low growl vibrating through his body. Emily froze instantly, recognizing his warning signal. Something had changed in their environment, a potential threat had emerged. "What is it?" Jack whispered, moving closer to Emily's side. Emily raised her hand for silence, focusing all her attention on her senses. The forest had gone quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The wind carried a new scent, musky and distinctive. "Bear," she whispered back. "Close. Upwind of us." Olivia's voice was barely audible. "Black bear or brown?" Shadow's posture provided the answer before Emily could respond. His growl remained low and cautionary rather than aggressive. His body was tense, but not preparing to defend. "Black bear," Emily said with certainty. If it were a grizzly, Shadow would be positioning differently. Jack reached slowly for the flare gun he carried for emergencies, the subtle sound of metal against fabric, unmistakable to Emily's ears. "Where?" he asked, his voice steady. Emily pointed slightly left of their forward path. "That direction. Not moving toward us yet, but aware of us." "I see it," Olivia confirmed, her voice professionally calm despite the tension. "Through those hemlocks, about 60 yards ahead. It's a juvenile male, I think." Shadow maintained his warning posture, placing himself squarely between the unseen bear and Emily. However, he made no move to retreat or advance. A clear signal to Emily that the bear wasn't showing immediate aggressive intent. "It's probably just surprised to find humans in this part of the forest after the mudslides," Emily suggested. "We're in an area that would normally have hiking trails and human scent markers. Those are gone now." "What do you suggest?" Jack asked, deferring to Emily's experience with Shadow's signals. The simple question represented a profound shift in their relationship. Before this journey, Jack would have issued instructions, taking command of any wildlife encounter to protect his blind daughter. Now he was acknowledging her expertise, recognizing that her connection with Shadow gave her insights he lacked. "We make our presence known but non-threatening," Emily replied confidently. "Talk in normal voices, Move slowly but purposefully on a path that gives the bear plenty of space. Show we're not prey, not predators, and not interested in conflict. The textbook perfect, Olivia approved. I couldn't have suggested better myself. And they implemented the strategy immediately, adjusting their route to arc widely around the bear's position while maintaining natural conversation. Emily described to Olivia how Shadow communicated different levels of threat through subtle variations. In his posture and vocalizations, Jack added observations about seasonal bear behavior in the Blue Ridge ecosystem. Their voices, calm and human, clearly identified them to the wild creature. Shadow remained vigilant throughout the encounter, his body in contact with Emily's leg, providing continuous updates on the bear's position and response. Gradually, his tension eased as the distance between them and the bear increased. "It's moving away," Olivia reported after they had been walking for several minutes. "Heading north, away from our path." "Shadow's telling me the same thing," Emily said, feeling the wolf's muscles relax beneath her hand. "The threat has passed." Jack exhaled audibly, the sound conveying both relief and something like admiration. That was remarkably smooth. Usually, bear encounters involve more adrenaline. "Most people panic or respond instinctively," Emily explained. "Shadow gives us the advantage of advanced warning and accurate threat assessment. We can respond rationally instead of emotionally." They continued their journey with renewed appreciation for Shadow's abilities. The wolf had returned to his guiding role, leading them through increasingly familiar territory as they approached the ranch's boundaries. The forest began to show signs of human management, selective cutting that Jack had implemented years ago to reduce fire risk while maintaining wildlife habitat. By early afternoon, they detected the first clear indicator that they were nearing Oakwood Ranch, the distant sound of cattle lowing in mountain pastures. The sound energized them all, especially Shadow, who pricked his ears forward and quickened his pace slightly. "Almost home," Emily said, reaching down to ruffle the wolf's fur affectionately. The terrain opened gradually from dense forest to scattered stands of pine, interspersed with meadows of mountain grasses. Emily sensed the changing landscape through subtle shifts in acoustics and air movement. Sounds traveled differently in open spaces, and breezes carried different scents across meadows than through timber. "There's the line shack," Jack announced with evident relief, "just visible at the edge of that meadow ahead." Emily nodded, recognizing their location from the particular symphony of sounds, a small stream burbling to their left, the distinctive whisper of aspen leaves from a grove near the shack, the hollow knock of a woodpecker working a dead pine that had stood at the meadow's edge for as long as she could remember. "I know exactly where we are," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Home feels close enough to touch." 2 miles at most, Jack confirmed. "Mostly open country from here." They paused at the line shack to rest briefly, drinking from the spring that bubbled up beside the small structure. The water was sweet and cold, a vast improvement over the silty creek water they had rationed through the morning. Emily sat on the shack's worn wooden steps, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of initials she and her mother had carved there years ago. "JW and MW with little EW underneath," she said softly. "Mum insisted I add mine even, though I could barely hold the knife." Jack's voice carried a rare vulnerability when he responded. "I remember. Margaret said you needed to mark your place in the world, to leave evidence of your existence on the things you loved." The unexpected mention of her mother created a moment of shared remembrance between father and daughter. Margaret Walker had been gone for 5 years, but her philosophy continued to shape their lives, especially her belief that Emily's blindness offered unique gifts along with its challenges. She would have loved seeing Shadow guide us home through an impossible situation, Emily said after a moment. "She always said I'd find my own way." She was right about most things, Jack admitted. I haven't always been as good at seeing that as I should have been." Olivia had given them space during this personal exchange, examining the construction of the line shack with scientific interest. Now she rejoined them, her footsteps crunching lightly on pine needles. "This final stretch looks straightforward," she observed. "We should reach the main ranch buildings well before sunset." Emily nodded, rising to her feet with renewed energy. Shadow's getting impatient. He knows exactly where we are and wants to complete the journey. Indeed, the wolf had positioned himself at the trail leading from the line shack toward the main ranch, his posture conveying readiness to move forward. When Emily approached, he pressed against her leg with unusual firmness, his message clear. It was time to go home. The trail from the line shack to the main ranch was one Emily could have walked blindfolded even before losing her sight. It followed a gentle downhill grade through alternating meadows and pine groves, eventually connecting with the dirt access road that led to Oakwood's main buildings. Under normal circumstances, it was an easy hour's walk. Today, however, Emily found herself savoring every step, acutely aware of how close they had come to never making this familiar journey again. The mudslides had reshaped more than just the physical landscape. They had altered something fundamental in her relationships with her father, with Shadow, and perhaps with her own understanding of her capabilities. "I've been thinking," Jack said as they walked side by side, Shadow ranging slightly ahead as if scouting their triumphant return, "about those boundaries we established after your mother died." Emily tilted her head, listening carefully to the nuances in her father's voice. "What about them?" "They need revisiting," Jack said simply. "This journey has made it abundantly clear that I've been overcautious, perhaps even limiting. You and Shadow have demonstrated capabilities I hadn't fully acknowledged." The admission, understated though it was, represented a monumental shift in Jack Walker's perspective. Emily reached out to squeeze her father's hand briefly, wordlessly acknowledging the difficulty and significance of his words. "We can establish new guidelines that respect both my concerns and your abilities," Jack continued. "Maybe Olivia's research project can help inform that process, provide some objective measurements to balance my subjective worries." "I'd be honored to contribute to that conversation," Olivia said from behind them. "There's substantial research on risk assessment and management for visually impaired individuals in wilderness settings. Combined with our observations of Shadow's capabilities, we could develop protocols that maximize safety while honoring autonomy." Emily smiled, sensing the birth of a collaboration that might extend far beyond their immediate situation. "I'd like that. Not just for me, but for others too. What Shadow and I have learned about navigating together could help other partnerships." As they walked, they began outlining preliminary ideas for structured exploration of the ranch's boundaries, gradual expansion of Emily's independent range, and documentation of Shadow's guiding behaviors in varying conditions. The conversation was relaxed yet purposeful. Three people with different perspectives, united by genuine respect and shared goals. By late afternoon, they crested the final rise that overlooked Oakwood Ranch's main buildings. Emily couldn't see the familiar structures, but she sensed their presence through 1,000 subtle cues: the change in air currents as wind flowed around buildings, the distant sounds of ranch operations, the sense of hay, livestock, and wood smoke that had defined home throughout her life. "Oh, we made it," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion, against considerable odds. "Thanks to Shadow," Emily added, kneeling to embrace the wolf who had guided them through wilderness transformed by disaster. Shadow accepted her gratitude with dignified patience, his body relaxed now that his mission was nearly complete. Olivia cleared her throat softly. "And thanks to you, Emily. Your trust in Shadow, your sensory awareness, your courage, they were just as crucial to our survival as his instincts." As they stood together on the hilltop, preparing for the final descent to home, Emily reflected on how their ordeal had transformed them all. Jack had begun to see her capabilities rather than just her limitations. Olivia had witnessed a human-animal bond that transcended her scientific categories, and Emily herself had discovered depths of confidence and independence she hadn't fully claimed before. Shadow, perhaps sensing her reflection, pressed against her leg with familiar reassurance. Whatever changes awaited them at Oakwood Ranch, whatever new boundaries and possibilities emerged from their shared journey, the foundation remained unshaken, the extraordinary connection between a blind woman and the wolf who had become her eyes, her guide, and her most faithful companion. Their arrival at Oakwood Ranch caused a flurry of activity. Ranch hands who had been searching the eastern pastures rushed to meet them, radio calls went out to the remaining search parties, and the property's 2 border collies circled excitedly around the returning group. Shadow maintained his dignified composure amid the chaos, staying close to Emily's side as she was engulfed in relieved greetings. "We've had search teams out since the first mudslide," explained Roy Whitman, the ranch foreman who had worked for the Walkers since before Emily was born. "State emergency services said we'd have to wait, but nobody here was willing to sit idle." "Thank you, Roy," Jack said, clasping the older man's shoulder. "We appreciate everyone's efforts. Could you make sure the teams are recalled? And we could all use hot food and clean clothes." Within the hour, Emily found herself in the ranch house's large kitchen, freshly showered and changed, sitting at the weathered oak table that had been the center of family life for generations. The familiar smells of home surrounded her, pine woodwork, leather-bound books, and now the rich aroma of Rosa's venison stew simmering on the stove. Rosa, the ranch's cook and housekeeper for 20 years, moved about the kitchen with efficient purpose, muttering affectionate scoldings in a mixture of English and Spanish. 3 days in the wilderness, Nina. Your poor father aged 10 years with worry. And you—" She paused near Emily, placing a weathered hand gently on her cheek. "You look tired, but strong. The mountains did not defeat you." Emily smiled, leaning into the maternal touch she had missed since her mother's passing. "No, they didn't, thanks to Shadow." At the mention of his name, the wolf shifted from his position near the hearth. He had refused to leave Emily's side even during her shower, waiting patiently outside the bathroom door. Now he approached the table, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "This one," Rosa said with affectionate exasperation, "has been impossible since you disappeared. Pacing, howling at night, refusing food. Now he looks as smug as a coyote in a henhouse." "He has reason to be proud," Emily replied, reaching down to stroke Shadow's head as he settled beside her chair. "He saved 3 lives." Jack entered the kitchen, followed by Olivia. They had also cleaned up, Jack now dressed in his customary ranch clothes, worn jeans and a flannel shirt, while Olivia wore borrowed attire that was slightly too large for her slim frame. They joined Emily at the table as Rosa served generous bowls of stew, accompanied by slabs of homemade bread. "I've updated the sheriff's office," Jack reported between mouthfuls. "They're still assessing the mudslide damage throughout the county. 3 other families are missing and several roads are completely gone." Emily sobered at the news. "Have they found anyone else?" "One family turned up at a hunting cabin on the western ridge," Jack said. "The others are still unaccounted." 4. "They should consider using scent-trained dogs in the search," Olivia suggested. "After seeing Shadow's capabilities, I'm convinced that olfactory tracking would be more effective than visual searches in the altered terrain." Jack nodded, thoughtfully. "I'll suggest it when they call for their next update." As they ate, Emily became aware of subtle changes in the group dynamic. Her father, though still protective, addressed her as an equal partner in their discussions. Olivia had transitioned from outside observer to something closer to family. Friend, her scientific detachment softened by shared experience. And Shadow, while maintaining his vigilant attention to Emily's needs, had relaxed enough to accept occasional petting from the others, a significant expansion of his typically exclusive bond. "I've been thinking about your research project," Emily said to Olivia as they finished their meal. "If you're still interested, I'd like to formalize my participation." Olivia's response came with undisguised enthusiasm. "Absolutely. After what I've witnessed these past few days, the potential insights are even more significant than I'd anticipated." "What exactly would this project entail?" Rosa asked as she cleared their empty bowls, her protective instincts clearly engaged. Emily needs rest after such an ordeal, not scientific prodding. "It would be entirely observational," Olivia assured her. "Documentation of Emily and Shadow's existing interactions, interviews about their communication methods, possibly some controlled exercises to demonstrate navigation techniques. The goal isn't to study us like specimens," Emily added, sensing Rosa's lingering concern. "It's to help others understand what's possible between humans and animals, especially for people with visual impairments." Rosa's expression softened at this explanation. "That sounds worthwhile, then. Helping others is always good work." After dinner, they gathered in the ranch house's living room, a warm space dominated by a large stone fireplace and furnished with well-worn leather couches. The room held countless memories for Emily, from childhood story times on her mother's lap to more recent evenings spent listening to her father read aloud after her vision had completely failed. Now it embraced their expanded circle, accommodating new connections formed through extraordinary circumstances. "I made some calls to the university while you were settling in," Olivia said, her voice carrying the controlled excitement of a scientist glimpsing a breakthrough. "My department chair is willing to consider expanding the research grant to include a collaborative component, with you as a co-investigator rather than simply a research subject, Emily." "Really?" Emily straightened, intrigued by the possibility. "I don't have any formal scientific training." "You have something more valuable, lived experience and extraordinary observational skills," Olivia countered. "Your insights into Shadow's communication and guidance techniques would be impossible for an outside researcher to develop independently." Jack, who had been quietly listening from his favorite armchair, cleared his throat. What would this mean in practical terms? Would Emily need to travel to the university? "Some campus visits would be valuable," Olivia acknowledged, "but most of the research would happen here at Oakwood. We document Shadow's behaviors in his natural environment, interview Emily about their communication methods, perhaps design some controlled navigation exercises." Emily considered the proposal, her fingers absently stroking Shadow's fur as the wolf rested his head on her knee. The prospect of translating their private language of subtle cues and responses into something others could understand was both exciting and slightly daunting. Their connection had developed organically over years, without conscious analysis or categorization. "I'd want to ensure that any research activities respect Shadow's autonomy," she said finally. "He's not a trained service animal. He's a wild creature who chooses to stay and help." "That's precisely what makes your partnership so extraordinary," Olivia agreed. "Traditional service animal training creates reliable but prescribed behaviors. Shadow's guidance emerges from genuine understanding and choice. It's revolutionary." As they discussed logistics, Emily became aware of her father's unusual silence. Normally, Jack would have interjected practical concerns or protective caveats. Instead, he was listening intently, his breathing pattern suggesting thoughtful consideration rather than skepticism. "Dad?" Emily prompted gently. "What are you thinking?" Jack shifted in his chair. I'm thinking your mother would be proud of where this is heading. She always believed your relationship with Shadow would lead to something important. Not just for you, but for others. The mention of Margaret Walker created a moment of poignant remembrance. Emily's mother had been the first to recognize the unique bond forming between her daughter and the orphaned wolf pup, defending Emily's decision to nurse him back to health against skeptical neighbors and even Jack's initial doubts. She understood what was happening between us before anyone else did, Emily said softly. Remember how she insisted we not treat Shadow like a pet? How she said he needed to decide his own relationship with humans? Jack's voice warmed with memory. She had a special way of seeing possibilities that weren't obvious to the rest of us. I think this research project would honor that vision. His endorsement settled something in Emily's mind. Then let's do it. Let's document what Shadow and I have learned together, so others might benefit. Olivia leaned forward, her voice brightening with purpose. I'll draft a formal proposal tomorrow. We can review it together before I submit it to the university, and I'll need to arrange for specialized recording equipment, low-interference cameras, and microphones that won't disrupt Shadow's natural behaviors. As they continued planning, Emily sensed Shadow's attention shift toward the large windows, overlooking the front porch. A moment later, the wolf rose from his resting position and moved to the door, his posture alert but not alarmed. "Someone's coming," Emily said, interpreting Shadow's behavior with practiced ease. Jack stood, moving to the window. "It's Sheriff Lawson. Probably wants our official statements about the mudslide for his report." The sheriff's arrival temporarily paused their research discussion, shifting focus to the natural disaster that had catalyzed their journey. Emily listened as Jack recounted their experience. Olivia added scientific observations about the slide's behavior, and occasionally Emily contributed details about Shadow's warning signals and guidance through the altered terrain. Sheriff Lawson, a taciturn man who had served the county for nearly 2 decades, asked precise questions and took careful notes. When the formal interview concluded, he remained seated, his weathered hands clasped on the notepad in his lap. "There's something else," he said, his tone shifting from professional to personal. "The Mitchell family is still missing. Parents and their 10-year-old daughter. They were camping near Silver Ridge when the storms hit." Emily felt her father, tense beside her. The Mitchells were neighbors whose property adjoined Oakwood's southern boundary. Their daughter, Lily, had occasionally joined Emily for riding lessons before Emily's vision deteriorated completely. "The search teams are struggling," the sheriff continued. "The terrain's completely transformed, and we're short on manpower with multiple emergency situations across the county." The unspoken question hung in the air until Jack voiced it. "Are you asking for our help, Tom?" "I'm asking if that remarkable wolf of yours might be able to do for the Mitchells what he did for Emily," Sheriff Lawson replied directly. "Track them through terrain no human could navigate." Emily felt all attention shift to her and Shadow. The wolf had returned to her side during the interview, maintaining physical contact as he often did when strangers were present. Now he lifted his head, as if understanding he was the subject of discussion. "Shadow isn't trained for search and rescue," Emily said carefully. "His guidance is specifically attuned to me." "But he found you through impossible conditions," the sheriff pressed. "And from what you've described, he communicated with wild wolves to help locate you. Could he do something similar if he had a scent to follow?" Emily considered the question seriously, her hand resting on Shadow's back. The wolf had demonstrated extraordinary abilities during their wilderness journey, including cooperation with his wild cousins. But that had been to protect Emily, with whom he shared a profound bond. Would he extend similar effort for strangers? "He might," she said finally, "especially if we had something with the Mitchells' scent. But I would need to go with him." Shadow. And I work as a team. I read his signals. He responds to my directions. We navigate together. The sheriff's surprise was evident in his voice. You're proposing to join a search party after what you've just endured. Emily, Jack began, his protective instincts surfacing, but he stopped himself, visibly reconsidering. After a moment, he continued in a different tone. Emily has demonstrated remarkable capability in extreme conditions. If she believes she and Shadow can help, I think we should consider it seriously. The shift in her father's position, from automatic protection to thoughtful support, affected Emily deeply. This was the transformation their wilderness journey had catalyzed, a new recognition of her capabilities rather than her limitations. We would need to establish clear parameters, Jack continued, addressing the sheriff. Proper equipment, communication devices, designated partners familiar with wilderness navigation, and Emily's safety would remain the priority. Of course, Sheriff Lawson agreed. We could integrate your team into the larger search operation, provide radio support, emergency supplies. Olivia, who had been listening intently, added her perspective. This could also provide valuable insights for our research, observing Shadow's tracking and communication behaviors in a structured search scenario. With appropriate safeguards, it could serve multiple purposes. Emily focused her attention on Shadow, seeking confirmation from the wolf himself. She ran her hands through his thick fur, feeling the strong muscles beneath, sensing his alert attention to the conversation around them. "What do you think, boy?" she asked softly. "Can we help find Lily and her parents?" Shadow's response came as a subtle shift in posture, a straightening of his spine, a pressing closer to her leg, a soft whine that Emily had learned to interpret as affirmation. After 6 years together, navigating both ordinary days and extraordinary challenges, she trusted his communication implicitly. "We'll help," Emily said decisively, turning back to the sheriff. "When would the search begin?" "First light tomorrow," Sheriff Lawson replied, relief evident in his voice. "I can have someone bring over an item with the Mitchells' scent tonight, so Shadow can familiarize himself." As the conversation turned to logistics, equipment needs, team composition, search sectors, Emily felt a profound sense of purpose settling over her. Their own ordeal, rather than depleting their resources, had revealed capabilities and connections that might now help another family in danger. Shadow remained steadfast beside her, his presence a constant reminder of the extraordinary partnership that had developed between them. Tomorrow, they would venture back into the wilderness that had nearly claimed them, this time not as survivors, but as rescuers, their bond now extending beyond mutual protection to encompass a larger responsibility to their community. In that moment, sitting in the familiar warmth of Oakwood's living room with new possibilities unfolding before them, Emily understood that the true significance of her journey with Shadow was only beginning to emerge. What had started 6 years ago as an act of compassion for an orphaned wolf pup had evolved into something transformative, not just for themselves, but potentially for others who faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Shadow pressed his muzzle against her hand, as if confirming her thoughts. Together, they had discovered pathways through wilderness that neither could have navigated alone. Now, they would help others find their way home. Dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of amber and pearl as Emily stood on Oakwood's front porch, absorbing the sounds and scents of early morning. The search team had assembled in the ranch yard, 6 experienced rescuers, Sheriff Lawson, Jack, Olivia, and Emily with Shadow at her side. The atmosphere was purposeful but tense, everyone aware that the Mitchells had now spent 3 nights in wilderness, ravaged by mudslides and flooding. "We have Lily's jacket," Sheriff Lawson said, approaching Emily with a plastic bag containing a child's windbreaker. Her mother packed it for the camping trip, but they left it in their vehicle at the trailhead. It should have a strong scent marker. Emily nodded, kneeling beside Shadow. She opened the bag, holding it low enough for the wolf to investigate. Shadow approached cautiously, his sensitive nose working as he processed the unfamiliar scent. Emily felt his body language shift as he committed the smell to memory, a subtle tensing of muscles, a more focused quality to his attention. "He's got it," she confirmed, standing and securing her gear. The search team had outfitted her with high-end equipment, a lightweight backpack containing emergency supplies, a satellite phone more advanced than the one she'd lost in the mudslide, and a specially designed harness that allowed her to maintain contact with Shadow while keeping her hands free for her walking stick. Jack approached, giving her equipment a final check. His concern was evident in his voice, though he maintained the new balance they had established, supportive rather than restrictive. "The radio is in the left side pocket," he reminded her. "Check in every 30 minutes, sooner if Shadow indicates anything significant." "I will," Emily promised, adjusting her gloves. "You'll be monitoring from base camp." "With Olivia," Jack confirmed. "We'll coordinate with the teams covering the adjacent search sectors. If the Mitchells moved after the initial slide, we want to be able to redirect resources quickly." Emily nodded, understanding the search strategy. 5 teams would cover different sections of Silver Ridge, where the Mitchells had been camping. Emily and Shadow, accompanied by 2 experienced rescue workers, would take the most challenging sector, a steep drainage area that had been heavily impacted by the mudslides. "Trust your instincts," Jack said, briefly squeezing her shoulder. "Both of you, you've proven they're reliable." The simple acknowledgement of her capabilities meant more than any elaborate expression of confidence could have. Emily smiled, returning the gesture before turning toward her assigned team members, Dave Collins and Miguel Reyes, both longtime search and rescue volunteers who knew the Blue Ridge Mountains intimately. "We're ready when you are," Dave said, his voice carrying the calm assurance of experience. "Sheriff says you and Shadow set the pace." Emily appreciated their willingness to follow her lead, a significant shift from the protectiveness most people automatically extended to someone with visual impairment. Their wilderness ordeal had altered more than just her father's perception. Word had spread quickly about Shadow's extraordinary guidance abilities. "Shadow will range ahead once he picks up a trail," she explained. "I'll interpret his signals, but if either of you spots a hazard I might miss, don't hesitate to speak up." The search teams departed in different vehicles, heading toward the Silver Ridge trailhead, where the Mitchells' car had been found. Emily rode with Dave and Miguel, Shadow sitting alertly beside her in the back seat of their 4-wheel-drive truck. The wolf's energy had a focused quality Emily recognized from their tracking exercises around Oakwood. He understood their purpose and was already shifting into working mode. The trailhead parking area had been partially washed out by the storms, mud and debris covering the lower section where several vehicles had been damaged. The Mitchells' SUV remained intact on higher ground, now surrounded by emergency vehicles and search team trucks. As Emily exited their vehicle, the sounds of multiple conversations and radio communications created a complex audio landscape. She filtered through them, focusing on the key information being shared: weather predictions, terrain assessments, search quadrant assignments. Shadow pressed against her leg, helping her navigate through the busy staging area toward the trail. Entrance. Sheriff Lawson conducted a final briefing, emphasizing safety protocols and communication schedules. Each team would carry emergency medical supplies, as the Mitchells might require immediate treatment if found. The forecast called for clear weather, but everyone was warned to remain vigilant for unstable ground and secondary slides. "Emily and Shadow's team will cover Sector 4, the sheriff concluded. "Based on their recent experience in similar conditions, they may have the best chance of finding signs others would miss. All teams maintain radio contact and report anything unusual immediately." With final preparations complete, Emily knelt once more beside Shadow, holding Lily's jacket for him to scent again. The wolf's attention focused completely on the garment, his body tensing with purpose. "Find them, Shadow," Emily said softly, the command they had practiced during years of tracking games around the ranch. "Find Lily." Shadow moved immediately, toward the trailhead, his pace purposeful but measured, allowing Emily to follow with her walking stick, testing the path ahead. Dave and Miguel fell in behind them, maintaining a respectful distance that gave Emily and Shadow room to work as a team. The trail showed immediate evidence of the storm's impact, washouts where rushing water had carved channels across the path, fallen trees that required careful navigation, sections where the original trail had disappeared completely beneath slides of mud and rock. Under normal circumstances, such conditions would have presented nearly insurmountable challenges for a blind hiker. With Shadow's guidance, Emily moved through them with surprising efficiency. "He's not just finding a path," Miguel observed, quietly after they had navigated a particularly difficult section. "He's finding the optimal path specifically for you, testing footing before you reach it, identifying handholds, calculating clearances." Emily nodded, unable to suppress a small smile of pride in Shadow's abilities. "He's always been able to translate between his perception of the environment and my needs within it. It's why we work so well together." They had been searching for just over an hour when Shadow's behavior changed subtly. His pace slowed, his attention shifting more frequently between the trail ahead and Emily. She recognized the pattern immediately. He had detected something relevant to their mission. "He's got something," she informed her teammates, focusing completely on Shadow's signals, not directly on the trail, but nearby. Dave and Miguel immediately stopped, allowing Emily and Shadow to work without distraction. The wolf moved off the main path, angling toward a steep drainage area to their left. Emily followed carefully, her walking stick finding secure placement on increasingly unstable ground. "What's he sensing?" Dave asked, his voice hushed as if speaking too loudly might disrupt Shadow's concentration. "Not sure yet," Emily replied, "but it's significant. His body language is very focused." Shadow led them about 50 yards from the main trail, working his way down a slope littered with broken branches and displaced rocks. He paused at a particular section of disturbed earth, circling it with increasing intensity before looking back at Emily with a soft whine. "Someone was here," Emily interpreted confidently, "recently enough that the scent remains despite the rain." Miguel moved forward carefully, kneeling to examine the area Shadow had identified. After a moment, he confirmed Emily's assessment. "Footprints," he said, "partially filled with water but still visible. 3 sets, 2 adult, 1 child. They were moving downhill, away from the main trail." Dave called in their discovery to base camp, while Emily encouraged Shadow to continue tracking. The wolf moved with increasing urgency now, following a meandering path that suggested the Mitchells had been seeking a route down to the valley floor after the mudslide had taken out the main trail. They were trying to reach the emergency access road that runs along the valley bottom, Miguel suggested as they followed Shadow's lead. "It's the most direct way out if the upper trails are compromised." The terrain grew increasingly challenging. As they descended, evidence of massive earth movement visible in uprooted trees, newly formed gullies, and precariously balanced boulders. Shadow navigated these hazards with extraordinary care, consistently identifying stable paths that Emily could follow despite her inability to see the obstacles. They had been tracking for another hour when Shadow suddenly froze, his body tensing. Beneath Emily's hand, a low, urgent whine rose from his throat, a sound Emily had learned meant he had detected something critical. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly, her hand moving to his ruff. Shadow broke from her side for the first time during the search, moving forward about 20 feet before stopping and looking back with another urgent whine. Emily followed as quickly as safety allowed, Dave and Miguel close behind her. As she approached, Shadow's vocalizations increased in frequency and intensity. "Something important," Emily told her teammates. "He's found either the Mitchells or clear evidence of them." Miguel moved slightly ahead, scanning the area Shadow had indicated. His sharp intake of breath confirmed a significant discovery. "It's a shelter," he reported. "Makeshift lean-to against that fallen oak, and there's a small backpack outside, child-sized, pink with butterfly patches." "Lily's," Emily confirmed, remembering the distinctive backpack the girl had carried during her visits to Oakwood. "Are they inside?" Dave approached the shelter cautiously, calling out as he did. "Hello? Mitchell family? This is search and rescue." A moment of breathless silence followed, then a small voice responded weakly from within the crude structure. "Here. We're here." The next minutes unfolded in controlled urgency. The team discovered all 3 Mitchells alive inside. The shelter, though, in concerning condition after 3 days exposed to the elements. Robert Mitchell had a broken leg, splintered with branches and strips of clothing. His wife Karen was suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion. 10-year-old Lily was in somewhat better condition but dehydrated and frightened. Dave immediately radioed their location to base camp, requesting medical evacuation, while Miguel unpacked emergency supplies. Emily knelt beside the shelter entrance, Shadow still at her side. "Lily," she called gently, "it's Emily Walker from Oakwood Ranch. Do you remember me?" "The lady with the wolf," came the child's weak but clear response. "You taught me to ride thunder." Emily smiled at the memory of Lily's riding lessons on the gentle Palomino gelding. "That's right, and this is Shadow, my wolf. He followed your scent and found you." There was a rustle of movement. Then Lily spoke again, closer now. "Can I pet him?" "For a moment," Emily agreed, feeling Shadow's response as the child reached out to touch his fur. The wolf, typically averse to contact from strangers, held perfectly still, allowing Lily's small hand to rest briefly on his head. "He's beautiful," Lily whispered. "Did he really find us all by himself?" "We found you together," Emily explained, accepting the water bottle Miguel handed her and helping Lily drink small sips. "Shadow can detect scents and find paths that humans can't see, and I help interpret what he's telling me. We make a good team." As they waited for the medical evacuation helicopter, Emily learned how the Mitchells had survived their ordeal. They had been hiking when the first mudslide hit, destroying their campsite and forcing them to flee. Robert's leg had broken during a fall as they attempted to reach lower ground. Finding themselves cut off from all established trails, they had constructed the makeshift shelter and rationed their limited supplies, hoping rescuers would eventually find them. "We heard helicopters yesterday," Karen Mitchell explained weakly, accepting the emergency blanket Miguel wrapped around her shoulders. "But they couldn't see us under these trees. We thought no one would find us." "Most people wouldn't have," Dave acknowledged, glancing at Shadow with undisguised admiration. "This is something special." The medical evacuation team arrived 40 minutes later, bringing additional emergency personnel who prepared the Mitchells for transport. A rescue basket was required to move Robert safely up the steep slope to where the helicopter could land. Throughout the complex operation, Shadow remained close to Emily, occasionally checking on Lily as if monitoring her condition. As the evacuation proceeded, Olivia and Jack arrived on foot, having hiked in from the nearest accessible road after receiving news of the rescue. Olivia immediately began documenting Shadow's behaviors, while Jack helped coordinate with the other search teams. Now converging on their location. "You did it," Jack said quietly to Emily during a brief moment alone. "All 3 alive because of you and Shadow." Emily shook her head slightly. "Because of Shadow's abilities and a whole team of people working together. I was just the translator." "You were essential," Jack insisted. "No one else could have interpreted his signals the way you did. Your partnership made this possible." Emily accepted his assessment with a nod, reaching down to stroke Shadow's fur. The wolf leaned against her leg, his mission complete, but his vigilance undiminished. She felt a profound gratitude for their connection, a bond that had evolved from mutual need into something that now extended life-saving protection to others. As the helicopter lifted off with the Mitchell family aboard, the search and rescue operation transitioned to recovery mode, gathering equipment, documenting the site, planning their exit route. Emily found herself standing slightly apart from the activity, absorbing the significance of what had occurred. Olivia approached, her voice warm with both scientific appreciation and personal emotion. "What you and Shadow accomplished today goes beyond impressive. It's revolutionary. You've demonstrated capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about human-animal partnerships and adaptive navigation." Emily smiled, understanding the researcher's excitement while feeling something deeper herself. Today wasn't about proving anything or challenging assumptions. It was about using the gifts we've developed together to help others. "That's precisely why it matters so much," Olivia replied. "The most meaningful advances come from authentic need, not theoretical exploration." Their journey back to the trailhead was considerably easier than the search had been. With the immediate pressure removed, Emily was able to appreciate Shadow's guidance in a new light, not just as a personal resource, but as a capability with broader potential. The wolf moved with the same careful attention to her needs, yet there was a new dimension to his behavior, an expanded awareness that seemed to encompass the entire search team. At the trailhead, they were met with quiet celebration. News of the successful rescue had spread, and the other search teams received them with respectful acknowledgement. Sheriff Lawson approached Emily directly, his typically formal demeanor softened by genuine gratitude. "The Mitchells would have died out. They're without you and Shadow," he said simply. "No conventional search methods would have located them in time. What you two did today, it's beyond remarkable." As they prepared to return to Oakwood Ranch, Emily felt a subtle shift in her understanding of her relationship with Shadow. What had begun 6 years ago as personal salvation, an orphaned wolf pup and a young woman navigating blindness, had evolved into something with purpose beyond themselves. Their unique communication, developed through years of mutual trust and adaptation, now offered possibilities neither could have imagined alone. Shadow pressed against her leg as they climbed into the truck for the journey home, his solid presence, both familiar and somehow new. Emily ran her fingers through his thick fur, feeling the strong heart beating beneath. "Good boy," she whispered, the simple praise carrying depths of meaning only they fully shared. "We found them together." As the vehicles pulled away from Silver Ridge, returning to the world of everyday concerns and routines, Emily knew that something profound had been set in motion. The wilderness had challenged them, revealed them, and ultimately transformed them. What awaited at the intersection of science, nature, and human potential remained to be discovered. But one thing was certain: she and Shadow would navigate that journey as they had the mountain paths, together, each compensating for the other's limitations, each amplifying the other's strengths. In the endless night of blindness, Emily had found extraordinary sight through the eyes of a wolf, and in return, she had given Shadow purpose beyond his wild nature. Their story, like the mountain itself, had been reshaped by forces beyond their control, revealing veins of precious possibility where once there had been only stone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.